Hello and welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. It's great to have you with us for another look at the forces shaping our world.
Great to be here.
Before we jump in, just a quick reminder. If you find these conversations valuable, please make sure to follow and subscribe.
And you can also support the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts for a small monthly fee. It really does keep the lights on and gets you some extra episodes.
The link for that is right in the description. So let's get into it. We're sitting here in early 2026, and I'm looking at this pile of reports, and one word just keeps popping out: fragmentation. It feels like the geopolitical ice is, well, literally cracking. We're looking at a world where great power competition, the U.S., China, Russia is actively changing everything.
And for a small state like Denmark, that margin for error, it's basically gone. The old guardrails we used to count on are buckling.
I think nothing shows that better than the intelligence outlet 2025 from the Danish Defense Intelligence Service, the DDIS. There's a line in there I honestly had to read twice.
I think I know the one you mean.
In December 2025, they designated the United States, our oldest ally, the guarantor of our security, as a potential security risk. How does that even happen? How does our biggest ally become a risk?
It sounds shocking, right? But if you really look at the trend, it's the logical endpoint of an America-first mindset becoming permanent. It's a shift from an alliance based on friendship to one that's, well, transactional.
Yeah, so it's about realism.
Pure realism. The U.S. is focused on its own competition with China, and if our interests get in the way, we're just collateral damage. So the big question for us today is, how does a country like Denmark navigate this?
And that's our mission. We're going to trace this from the melting ice in the Arctic, to the hidden threats to our power grid, and all the way to the trade wars in the Pacific that, believe it or not, decide if we can keep the lights on in Copenhagen.
It's all connected. Let's start up north, the Arctic.
Right. For years, the motto was high north, low tension. But reading the DDI's assessment, that era is completely over, isn't it?
Yeah. It is dead. The report makes it crystal clear. Russia does not see the Arctic as a place for cooperation anymore. They see themselves in a direct conflict with the West.
And they're adopting a, what does the report call it, a confrontational approach.
Yeah, and that means more ground forces in their northwest, modernizing military bases, and they're also getting aggressive with maritime law.
Restricting navigation in international waters.
Exactly. Tightening their grip on the northern sea route. It's a power play, but it also shows they feel pressured. And here's the thing. They're not the only ones changing the game up there.
Right. China. The intelligence outlook says China is developing the ability to operate submarines in the Arctic. And I'm looking at this data from their 15th Arctic expedition, August 2025. 2 Chinese vessels near Greenland, calling it research.
It's a strategic wedge. They call it research, sure, but the intelligence community sees it as dual-use data collection, mapping the seabed.
For future submarine operations.
Precisely. And what's really interesting is that Russia, feeling the heat from Western sanctions, is actually letting China in. It's a classic marriage of convenience.
Which brings us right back to the U.S. If China and Russia are getting cozy in the Arctic, Washington is obviously going to react.
And this is where that European Policy Center report, "It's a Bargain, the Case of Greenland," comes in. It suggests Washington might just offer Greenland a deal that cuts Denmark and the EU out completely.
That's the nightmare scenario for Copenhagen, isn't it? The U.S. sees Greenland as a vital strategic location that cannot fall under Chinese influence.
And they might just bypass us to secure it. The report calls it predatory bargaining.
So what's the countermove? The report suggests this resource for security arrangement. How would that work in practice?
It's a pretty bold idea. Essentially, Denmark and the EU would finance the development of rare earth mineral extraction in Greenland. We provide the capital.
So we pay to develop the mines so that Chinese companies don't. And in return, the U.S. agrees to work with us instead of just going over our heads.
That's the gist of it. The recommendation is very explicit. We have to exclude Russian and Chinese companies from operating in Greenland. But that only works if we put our own money on the table. If we don't, Washington might make Nuke an offer they can't refuse.
A pay-to-play world. Okay, but the threat isn't just way up north. Let's pivot to the home front. This other report, Assessment of the Hybrid Threat to Denmark. It's all about threats below the level of actual armed conflict.
This is where things get really murky. We're not talking about tanks. We're talking about sabotage, interference. DDS is clear that Russia is using these hybrid methods to intimidate and disrupt.
And the main target isn't military bases, it's our infrastructure.
Hmm. We saw a preview of this, didn't we? The Baltic Connector pipeline incident back in October 2023.
Yeah, that was a huge wake-up call.
It was. And this Electric report, Battle-Tested Power Systems, it draws a really sharp line between how different parts of Europe see this threat.
How so?
Well, look at Finland and the Baltics. They treat their energy companies as part of total defense.
We hear that term total defense a lot. What does that actually look like?
In Finland, it's legally integrated. Their National Emergency Supply Agency coordinates everything. The utilities, the military, intelligence. They're all at the same table, sharing classified data, running drills together.
So the person running the power plant is basically part of the national security system.
Exactly. But then you look at parts of Southern Europe, and energy security is still treated more like a corporate cybersecurity problem.
So where does Denmark fall on that spectrum?
We're catching up, but
Okay.
the report says we have some major vulnerabilities. We need physical upgrades to our substations, and this is crucial, black start capabilities.
Black start capability. That sounds like something from a movie. What does that actually mean for the power grid?
Okay, so imagine the whole country goes dark. The main power lines from Germany, from Sweden, they're cut. You can't just flip a switch to turn everything back on because the power plants themselves need electricity to start up. Black start is the ability to reboot the grid all by yourself. Island mode, without any outside help.
It's like jump-starting a car, but for the entire country.
Exactly. And the key takeaway from the report is that resilience can no longer sit in isolated departments. Your IT guy and your military planner have to be in the same room because the attack is designed to hit both at the same time.
Okay, so Russian pressure in the Arctic, hybrid threats to our grid. Now I want to zoom way out to the Pacific, because I can almost hear a listener asking, why should I care about some conference in Korea when I'm worried about my heating bill?
It's a fair question, but the thing is, in 2026, there is no such thing as a faraway conflict anymore. We've got this State of the Region report from the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, PEC, and the mood there is, well, it's grim.
88%. That number just jumped off the page. 88% of Pacific experts say increased protectionism and trade wars is the #1 risk to growth.
It's massive. And you have to remember, Denmark is a small, open economy. We live and die by a rules-based global trading system. If the U.S. and China start putting up walls, the Danish economy gets sick fast.
The PSC report has 5 priorities for APEC leaders, and I want to go through them because every single one maps directly to Danish interests. It's almost spooky.
It shows how tangled the system is now. Let's do it.
Okay, priority #1, ameliorating protectionism. The big one.
Right. So on the surface, this is about tariffs. But for Denmark, it's existential. We're a shipping superpower. A huge percentage of global trade is moved by a Danish company. If the Pacific nations close their doors, if the U.S. and China decouple, global trade volume plummet.
And that hits Copenhagen's bottom line directly.
Yeah.
A trade war in the Pacific means a recession in Denmark.
It's that simple. Okay, number 2.
Lowering geopolitical tensions.
This is the strategic link. Think of it like a seesaw. The U.S. has limited military and diplomatic resources. If tensions explode over Taiwan or in the South China Sea, Washington has to pivot its attention to Asia.
Leaving a vacuum in Europe.
Precisely. If the U.S. is busy in the Pacific, who's watching the Russian submarines in the Arctic we were just talking about? Stability in the Pacific literally buys us security in the Atlantic. If Asia boils over, we're left in the cold with a very aggressive Russia.
That puts immense pressure on European defense.
Okay.
Okay, number 3. Boosting supply chain resilience.
Now connect this back to our power grid. We need those black start capabilities. We need to upgrade our substations.
We need hardware, transformers, high voltage equipment.
And where do the components for that stuff come from? That Electric report specifically warns about choke points for this kind of gear. A huge chunk of that manufacturing is in Asia. If those supply chains break because of a war or a trade embargo, Denmark literally can't buy the parts it needs to defend its grid from Russia.
So a conflict in Asia stops us from fixing the grid in Jutland. That's a terrifying thought.
We could be waiting for parts that are never going to arrive.
Okay, priority 4, managing emerging tech and AI.
This goes back to the DDI's report. They noted China is actively using espionage to get technology from Danish research institutions, and APEC is one of the places trying to set global rules for AI.
Without rules, it's the Wild West.
And in the Wild West, the biggest guy wins. Without global standards on tech transfer, which APEC is trying to build, our own Danish innovation is just ripe for the picking.
And finally, number 5, Supporting the WTO.
The referee! This is the classic small state dilemma. In a world of raw power, might makes right. The U.S. and China can survive without a referee. Denmark can't. We need the World Trade Organization to enforce the rules. If the WTO collapses, we lose our legal shield.
So when we see APEC leaders meeting, we shouldn't tune out.
We should be leaning in. The instability over there is a direct threat to our security right here. The Pacific and the Arctic, they're the same theater now.
Which brings us to the big question. We've just painted this picture of a really dangerous, fragmented world. So what can a small state actually do? Or we just leaves in the wind?
Not necessarily. There's a great policy brief from the GCSP in Geneva about the Agency of Middle Powers. It argues that countries like Denmark don't have to just pick a side and pray. We have options.
Okay, so what are they? One they mention is hedging.
Right. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. For us, that means keeping our strong U.S. alliance, of course, but also deepening European integration, building new trade links. It's about having options.
Then there's dominance denial. That sounds a bit aggressive.
It's more strategic than that. The goal is to create a balance of power so that no single country can control a region. In the Arctic, we don't want Russia to dominate, obviously. But frankly, we also don't want the U.S. to unilaterally call all the shots. We want a balance that protects international law.
And the last one is principled diplomacy.
Think of Norway or Switzerland. By maintaining a reputation for being a rules-based, predictable actor, you can become a bridge builder. Even enemies need to talk. Denmark can be that honest broker, which gives us influence far beyond our size.
But there are huge risks, aren't there? The literature on small states talks about the danger of betting on the wrong horse.
Or abandonment. What if we bet everything on the U.S. and then they turn fully isolationist or get completely bogged down in Asia? We're left high and dry. That's the fear that keeps strategists up at night.
And that takes us full circle, back to that worst-case scenario with Greenland. The fear of being bypassed by our own ally.
Yes. The EPC report says Denmark has to prepare for a situation where the U.S. uses coercion. Imagine Washington threatening tariffs or withholding intelligence to get what it wants in Greenland. That is the very definition of a security risk from an ally.
That's a chilling thought. So how do we stop that from happening?
The EPC's recommendation is that Denmark has to lead the charge to put Greenland firmly on NATO's agenda. We have to internationalize the problem.
So it's not just a U.S.-Denmark issue, it becomes a NATO issue.
Exactly. It brings the UK, Canada, Norway, everyone into the room. It makes it much harder for Washington to act alone, and it makes it harder for Russia or China to make inroads. It binds the U.S. to the alliance.
Safety in numbers? You tie down the giant with lots of small threads?
You have to. You have to make it in their interest to work with the system, not against it.
This has been frankly, a pretty sobering conversation. We're in a world of systemic competition, Russian jamming in the Baltic, Chinese subs off Greenland, trade wars in the Pacific. It's all one big, tangled mess.
It is. And if I could just leave our listeners with one final thought to chew on.
Please.
The DDI's report warns that all the great powers are putting their own interests first. The U.S., China, Russia, they're all willing to bend or break international rules when it suits them. We talk about our total defense model here at home, but you have to ask yourself, is domestic defense enough? If the entire international system crumbles, if the rules of the game just disappear, does Denmark need to fundamentally rethink its alliances? Can we rely on old treaties in this new world?
That's a question that will definitely keep me up tonight. Thank you for walking us through all of that. And thank you to everyone for listening.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed this analysis, please follow the podcast. And if you have a second, a 5-star rating really helps us reach more people who care about these issues.
It really does.
Until next time, stay curious and keep watching the horizon.
Goodbye.